Hi, everyone. I'm Pete Wright with LexJet, and I'm joined today by amazing photographer and artist Carl Caylor. Carl, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you. Thanks for asking, Pete.
So I want to ask you a little bit about the type of photography you do. Most of the people that are watching may not have heard of you or seen some of your work, so I just want to give them a little background on you before we kind of dive into some of the other stuff. So talk to me about the type of work you do.
I am a portrait photography person first, and I also do branding sessions and commercial work, product things on occasion. So, but mostly my initial impact is for portraits, people.
What brought you into photography?
My wrestling coach back in high school was also the yearbook advisor, and like a lot of us, we started in the yearbook and worked in the darkroom, and I was going to be a photojournalist from way back when, thinking this is going to be cool. I'm going to travel around the world and do things for National Geographic or stuff like that, and then realized at the time, because we were back on film days, that the printing that I did in the darkroom in the yearbook was very precise, and our wrestling coach treated that just like our wrestling practices, where everything has to be done correctly. And if there was dust or fixer dust or thumbprints or whatever, you printed it over, you made it right. And when I got into photojournalism to start with way back in that day, it was more about deadlines and meeting deadlines than it was about perfection. And it felt like being a butcher instead of a surgeon, and I transitioned into portraits. So it was all about, to me, it was all about the same kind of idea of truth of life, recording families and their family history, it just in a portrait world instead of traveling around the world and doing it in a photojournalistic world.
So one of the things you mentioned just now was printing in the darkroom, and
Yes.
Our modern darkroom is large format printing. And you've been printing probably longer than most people I've met. How long have you been doing your own printing now?
Oh, 2000, you mean inkjet?
Inkjet
Large
printing.
format inkjet, probably 2005, 2006-ish, somewhere in there maybe.
And I
Maybe
think you've been a LexJet customer pretty much the entire time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. First printer I got, from day one, it's been from LexJet, because not only can you get the printers, but have people help you go through the profiles and get everything all set. But then it's all the soft goods that are available for us too. Not just the ink and the cartridge or the heads and all that kind of fun stuff, but the different mediums. It's all there in one place, under one roof, and that's been extremely helpful.
So tell me, what made you decide, I want to start doing my own printing?
Well, you have control. That was one of the things the reason why I did so well in print competition years ago is because I printed my own work in the darkroom, and color, black and white, didn't matter, and worked for a lab that printed for everybody else too. But they told us it's like playing the game of telephone, right? You tell somebody something, and then it goes to the next person, and the next person around the circle, and by the time it gets back to you, it's not the same thing that you said in the first place. Whereas if you were printing yourself, everything that you had in here can end up on that medium. And so that was a huge benefit, not just for image competition and working on our degrees, but it's for my guests, that the vision I have that we talked about and discussed as a team, now I can bring to fruition based on me doing it and not trying to explain it to somebody else or rely on a different printer not being profiled the same way I was, or their densities or their custom work, or it's all about control.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've seen in you just over the years of watching you print the stuff you do, you print some very large and some very unique sizes for your clients that a lot of times you can't even get at a lab. So, I mean, that's obviously got to be one benefit, but then the pricing as well. I mean, what it would cost you to have some of the sizes that you're printing versus doing it yourself, that's got to be a factor as well.
It absolutely is. In fact, I'm sure I'm not alone in that. Deciding that you want to buy a new printer is a discussion that you usually have with your business partner or your spouse, and it's like convincing. But it was pretty easy to convince if we're going to create a whole new display for our gallery, and what we would have paid for it if we could have even gotten those sizes. We'll get back to that in a moment. But if we even could have gotten those sizes, would have been twice what the printer cost.
Yeah, and I would imagine there's scenarios where you walk into a customer's home and they say, I want to print here. This is what I want. And it's not a uniform size. I mean, 24 by 36s, 16 by 20s all day long, sure. But if somebody comes in and what they want is a 36 by 80 type size, you can do that.
Well, and most people don't know that they want that. And that's the fun part is I for years and years and years, I could care less about united inches. I don't care about square inches on and a 16 by 20. I don't sell 16 by 20s. I don't sell 20 by 24s. I don't sell 24 by 30s. I sell 20-inch prints, 24-inch prints, 30, 40, 50, 60, and so on. Whatever happens on the side, who cares? What is most important to me is what's best for the composition, what makes us the most powerful. And in some cases, that allows us to be more custom for the guest because, like you said, in their home, they're like, well, we have this little alcove here that would be wonderful for a print. And if they got a standard, 16 by 20, one, it would probably be too small, and two, it's a proportion that doesn't fit the long, narrow space that the guest has. So by being able to know that we can print that, and then when we're creating, we create for that proportion, then everything falls into place. So it's not by happenstance, it's by design.
Yeah, I like to think that you were kind of ahead of the curve in that if you look at the TVs we grew up watching in the 80s and the 90s, even the early 2000s, they were standard definition. Yeah. And the shape was almost square. If you look at it now, it feels almost square. Back then, it felt rectangular.
Yep.
But now we're at these high-definition TVs, and if you take a high-definition image and throw it on a regular TV, you're either going to have black bars on it or you're going to crop the sides off of it. And which means you're not getting the best representation of that image because of the limitations that the frame has put you in.
Correct.
Whereas in your scenario, you've I'm stepping out of those, and you did this before that type of stuff happened. You were stepping out of the limitations, saying, I'm not going to work within the framework of a 16 by 20 or an 8 by 10 or a 24 by 30. I'm going to print this image based on the way it looks best and the way it should be seen and figure everything else out. And by having your own printer, you could do that.
Absolutely. Or even in when I was printing from film, it was the same thing. We did the same type of thought. It's just you had wasted paper. You just trim it off, whatever. But and it's kind of the same now with the wide format printers. You need space to a lot of what I'm doing is canvas, and I'm wrapping it, stretching it, and we can get whatever size stretcher bars we want, So we just might have a little bit of wasted space on the edge of your image or the edge of the medium, but you need that space to wrap or do whatever you need to. So
that's one of the things that I like seeing in kind of our modern world of photography and printing, that I like that a lot of photographers are starting to step out of those constraints. And I wish it was something that was spoken more about and taught more regularly, because I still think so many photographers that are coming in, they've been hammered since they were kids. Got to get an 8 by 10, got to get a 4 by 6, and these standardized sizes have really been hammered into their heads. And I think when they start to explore doing their own printing, it really kind of opens their world up. And all of a sudden they start photographing differently. Because if you're in the 8 by 10 mindset, you get in the camera and you're photographing for an 8 by 10 and you're framing and composing everything based on that. But when that constraint's gone and you have the freedom to create with no barriers and no boundaries, boom. I mean, amazing.
Color outside the lines.
Exactly.
Yeah. And honestly, if you're in the 8 by 10 format mindset, you're already, in a hurtful way, because we're creating on 2 by 3 aspect ratio now. So you're already wider and narrower than we were in an 8 by 10 format. So, do it about balance, about composition, what's powerful, and make sure it fits within left and right or top and bottom, depending on whether they're horizontal or vertical. Expose it, and the edges don't matter. Just keep what's powerful.
So you mentioned canvas. You probably print on more medias than most photographers I know. You have a pretty diverse palette of the different types of papers and canvases you use. So talk to me about some of your favorites. I know you love some of our canvases and some of the medias we use. I want to hear about the different things you use and maybe the applications.
Well, things that are more rich that would have been painted on canvas, deep, rich earth tones. That's mostly what I'm going to be using for canvas. My black and white work, I do on a lot of different things, and it depends on the tonal ranges within that scene. Some things are going to be done on the natural line, the bamboo paper or the hemp papers. Some things are going to be done more on the Fiber Elite papers. That's my go-to. Absolutely love Fiber Elite, and it's got a little bit of that sheen to it, but it still has a feel of texture. It's thick. It feels rich just holding on to it, right? And so that's a big thing. In fact, my whole entire fellowship was printed on Fiber Elite. And in fact, I know other photographers, fellows that printed their whole entire portfolio on Fiber Elite as well. So it's a really good all-around paper for the gamut of tonal ranges, and it's a great viewing media. I use peel and stick for temporary signage and some more commercial work, but also for my studio to direct people where I want them to go. It's always kind of fun, but I also use it for actual portraits too. If it's something that's going to be temporary at an event and they want portraits there of their team or whatever, we'll create that peel and stick because it's repositionable. They pull it off, they put it back next year or whatever, or hopefully they don't and you have to buy it from me again. But maybe it shouldn't be repositionable, but at least it comes off nice and clean, doesn't peel the paint or anything like that. I love watercolor paper for pastels, and I play with a lot of different versions of that too. The William Turner is a favorite of mine because it's got a lot of tooth to it. But I suggest with William Turner's and all the papers that have mediums that have a lot of tooth, dry brush it first. So before you actually
knock off the loose fibers.
Knock off the loose fibers. So have a nice clean dry brush that's always there by your printer, and just brush it good first, softly, and then add the print so that way you don't run into flaking later. But that's the downside of something with a lot of texture to it. But when it works right, it's just beautiful stuff. So.
It really is. And that's probably one of the most maddening things to discover the first time is you print this beautiful image on not inexpensive paper, because some of those are very, very pricey, but worth it.
Yes.
And you've printed this entire thing, and then you look and there's one little tiny white speck, and it's always in like the worst possible place.
Yeah.
And that's where if you hadn't brushed it before and knocked off those loose fibers, it prints on it, and then that piece of fiber falls off and takes the ink with it, and you've got that little tiny white dot. So,
and I still go back to the dyes and actually spot them in if we have to, but it's better not to have to.
So you were talking about canvas, and I know there's a canvas that you absolutely love. It's the Elements Opal, correct?
Yes, the gloss, and now I believe it was a matte or satin that it comes in as well. I don't remember which one.
Yeah, there's several different options in it.
So we're going to be pursuing some of those directions as well, because gloss is great for a lot of applications, but a lot of people's homes, and the reason we don't like gloss presentations in our prints, one, it can really hurt, the plastic that's on the photograph itself, but most homes aren't designed to light glass presentations, and gloss is kind of almost like the glass. So even though it's really cool under our specified, directed light, maybe it isn't as good for some of the client homes, but it's still it's a beautiful, beautiful medium, and it stretches really nice. That's what I like about it. It's a good stretch for around the bars, and everything holds together. You don't have anything kind of flaking off there either when you're yanking around the corners. So that's always a good thing as well. Yeah,
to have something that doesn't need to be coated really shows great color on it, stretches easily, and you have options for what surface you want, whether you want matte, gloss, semi-gloss. You have some really great options there. So it's really nice to be able to use a media that hits all the points for you. So
yes, and the options are nice. Having options is good.
So you've been printing for a long time, as you mentioned. Talk to me kind of about your history, because you've worked with several different. I know Canon is your sweet spot. Yeah. Talk to me about the various Canon printers you've worked with and where you are now.
Yeah, larger format, of course, is what I like, because I like to make big wall portraits. But I think it was the 4000 first, and then the 4100 now. And I'm trying to remember, because I think I'm on the third one now, because I had a really nice printer that was beautiful and was wonderful and it was doing great, and then we moved 8 hours away, and I didn't feel comfortable moving it 8 hours away in the back of a truck over the top of Mackinac Bridge and everything. So sold it and bought the newer version, which has been great. But I love the Canon. I've also worked with Epsons, and they're nice too. I personally, just my opinion, I prefer the Canon. It seems to just work all the time. If I go a month without playing with it, it doesn't get all shy and bashful when I have to print something else again, and it just turns on, it cleans itself, and it works. So it's been a wonderful experience with the Canon printers.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you actually originally started with the Canon family, the 8400.
That's right. Yeah.
So you had the IPF 8400.
8400.
Then you moved to the Pro 4000.
And now the 41.
And now the 4100.
Yeah.
So you've been through 3 generations with Canon, and they've just gotten better every time. So it's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, and they were good to start with. So I remember laughing at you one time when we were talking about when I was going to upgrade from the 8400. And you're telling me how much better it is. I'm going, really? It's just good already. I mean, what's going to be better about it? And it is minute, but it is. And now even more so at the 4100. So they're growing. I mean, they're doing things right as far as keeping up with issues that little or not that came up, and actually listening and adjusting. And that's a really good thing. We appreciate that.
Yeah, the IPF 8400 had such like a religious following.
Yeah.
That when that was discontinued, you had people looking for used ones. Mm-hmm. They were just like, "There's no way you're ever going to get better than this. I'll find a used one. I'll do whatever I have to do to stay within this," because they loved it. They really did. And eventually, they had to move over to the 4000 and then the 4100. And every one of them's like, why did I wait so long? But you just find something that I think photographers were in some ways creatures of habit. And it's like you get into something that works. If it's not broke, don't fix it, right?
Fix it. Yeah.
But it's
a little bit better.
I tell you what,
it's a little bit better.
Well, and sometimes it's not even necessarily the quality; it's some of the features, like the self-loading and automatically knowing the type of media is a little bit quicker, just drying time. I mean, so many little things like that. So it's just that, and then all the free software that comes along with it. And that was a big thing with the Pro Series. There was a whole new software suite that didn't work with IPF 400 or the IPF 8400.
8400, yeah.
And it really gave you the ability not to have to go out and buy $2,000 or $3,000 worth of RIP software that would run the machines. So here you've got this great piece of software that runs your device that runs it really well. Yeah. So it's definitely a good family to be in. There's some definitely
absolutely
good printers out there.
And they're all good, though. I mean, the labs that I use I think they're using Epson, and it works for them great too. So both you can't really go wrong. No. I mean, they're beautiful pieces, toys, tools, and it allows us to be creative and create some really nice things for our galleries and for our guests. So
yeah, that's kind of the nice thing. Epson and Canon, they're constantly pushing each other to get better and better and better. And it's like every time one of them does something that's really great, the other one's like, okay, well then we need to do that, but let's also do this. Yeah. And that's why I think you see new series of printers come out every 2 to 3 years from them, because they want to make sure that they're not falling behind. Yep. And that really benefits
everybody,
the consumer. Yeah. On one hand, you're like, man, I just bought a printer 2 or 3 years ago. I don't want to buy another one. But on the other hand, you have to treat an investment like that, like a car. You know, you get your 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, whatever you're going to get out of it. And then you go get the new one, because now this one has a touchscreen stereo on it. And this one has, 4-wheel traction. Well, the printers are the same way. They have all these new features that didn't exist before. So with the medias you discussed, and you talked about some really great Hahnemühle medias, the hemp and the bamboo and the William Turner, and then we talked about some of the really great LexJet medias that you use. What photographers or what artists would use those specific medias and why? Like you get into the William Turner, you're not going to use that with everything. You get into the hemp and the bamboo, you're not going to use that with everything. You get into the canvases, you're not. So with the different medias, why would you use those specific medias?
You know what? It is a good question, but every image, every type of image kind of tells you what kind of media it should be on. So, for example, it's an extension of the harmony that's going on in your image. So your lighting has to work with your composition, it has to work with the colors, it has to work with the subject matter, that has to work with the scene. And so, for example, if we had a pastel kind of feel to it and it's soft and airy and fluffy and nice and warm and cuddly, well, I don't want that on metal, because then it's cold and it's flat and it's stern. I want that on paper that, like a watercolor paper, something that has nice soft texture to it so that it harmonizes with that image. That's why I choose canvas for things that are rich in earth tones. So for portrait photographers, why is it important to have a lot of different mediums? Because you have a lot of different guests. Most of us don't only photograph one genre anymore. We photograph kids, and we photograph families, and we photograph high school seniors, and some of us sprinkle in headshots and things like that. Well, in some corporate work. Well, some corporate work things might really need the peel and stick. They might need the vinyl. We didn't talk about that yet, but we do, big vinyl signs and banners and things of that nature too.
I think you use the Thrifty Tough Coat.
Yep, Tough Coat. That's a go-to. Yeah, and it works out so sweet. But it depends on the person, your guests, your clients, what their use is. I kind of combine that with what we're doing for that particular image, and that's what makes me choose the different medium that we're using.
Yeah, I guess even if you look within a wedding, within an individual wedding, when you do the portrait of the bride and the groom together, that's going to be more of a fine art type media. Yes. But then when you're doing candids from the dance floor, that's probably going to be like an East Satin or a luster type media.
More of a photographic feel to it.
It's you're really kind of tailoring the image and the paper to match each other based on what it's going to look best on and the type of image it is, right? You're
setting yourself apart as an artist, and that's a big thing because the mediums are allowing us to be seen by the public as an artist. Artists are more worth than a photographer. And it sounds really bad to say that, but artists can draw more worth or price tag than just a picture. And so if you're doing a fine art series, so maybe you're doing figure studies or character studies, and I'm going to do this in black and white, I might choose some of the natural line because it gives me that feel of more of a museum gallery type of texture and feel to it. And now they have already the pre-torn edge paper, which is really cool too.
Edge, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll get two sizes of that same kind of paper, and one is just the background, and I'll print something on that, and then I'll print the actual image on the deco, the torn edge stuff, and then mount those together. So we're using the same medium two different ways to create something more artistic that sets yourself apart. And that's just it. You kind of mentioned before, do you still do things in the lab? Yeah. Everyday photographic work, like you said, for the candid and the wedding, yeah, go for it. But you can't get a background and then a torn edge of the same medium from the lab. They just can't possibly create that product, but we can. And that's why it's important to have your own printer.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was the feel of the paper in your hand. And I don't think a lot of people that haven't done their own printing can appreciate the tactile experience of holding a print in their hand, especially if all your customer, as you say, guest has ever held is the equivalent of what they might get from Walmart or CVS or one of those type retail places or just a standard lab print. they all feel very much the same.
Yep.
When you hand them something that it's on a heavy textured paper, it's a different experience. It's a tactile experience. You're having a different relationship with that, and it feels nicer, fancier, more expensive, and it adds that perceived quality to it. I mean,
hitting all the senses. You still got to come up with the scratch and sniff. I talked about that before. I'm still asking for it just to add one more of the senses to help with that experience, but I don't think that's ever going to happen. So
let's just start spraying perfume on it. Right?
There we go.
So along those same lines, do you do fine art reproduction?
I do. In fact, I just did one for the city of Holland. I'm not sure how much people know about Holland, Michigan, but it's the home of Tulip Time Festival, where the entire town is tulips everywhere. They've already planted them back in the fall, so all the bulbs are in. But they'll come up on a lot lining streets and lining the parks and lining the square and at the windmill that we actually have a windmill, and there'll be fields of them and strips of them and planter boxes full of them and vertical walls full of tulips. Every year, apparently, I'm brand new to the area, but every year they have a theme for their Tulip Time poster. And this year's theme was bicycles, because bicycles, it's a huge area for bike riding trails, and Holland is the same way, right? The actual Holland. And so they came to me and asked if they used to go to another place several hours away to do the copy work to create the printable version, a digital version. And so they said, well, you're right across the street. Will you do it? I said, absolutely. Well, the artist this year that they chose, he created a painting on canvas. And so I said, well, okay, my first thought is then we're going to produce this on canvas as well. But then I make sure we light it from the same way that the painting is lit. So that way that what we light the canvas for the reproduction matches the original artist thought process of where the light was coming from to illuminate his bike and the scene and everything else. And we're going to print it on the same medium. And so we're going to keep it in a ratio, the proportion that matches the same texture of the canvas that we're going to print it on for their banners. So reproduction of artwork is there's a lot to it, but by having your own printer, it allows us to match closer to what they started with, what their thought process was, what their intent was, and then in the final reproduction, have it look very, very, very similar, feel very, very similar, and appear to be what they had in mind. So there's a lot to it, but we're capable because of the printers.
And knowing those different medias and having that relationship with the feel and the texture and the look and the presentation of those papers goes a long way into the experience that the viewers are going to see, because now you're talking about more of a gallery experience.
Yes.
Where it's not something that they're holding in their hands, but they're stepping back 6 feet away and looking at and really experiencing that print in a completely different way. So it gives you the ability to reproduce an image that has a different experience for the viewer than maybe the company that was 2 to 3 hours away that probably used the same paper every single time.
Every single time.
And as an artist, you're like, no, I can do better.
We can do better.
One last question. You're an international photographic judge.
Yeah.
You have been. That's how you and I met.
Yeah, that's how we met.
As a printer, how did printing your own images affect you as a judge when judging images?
As a lab technician, back in the day when we were doing in the darkroom and creating custom images in color and black and white and everything else, we learned what it took to create a custom image from whoever sent in their negatives. And the rule of thumb back then was that if you could tell that you did anything to it, it was wrong. In other words, for example, blunt example, people now like, oh, we have an action for burning. We press the button and it does this dark thing in the corner. I'm like, oh, for the love, please, for all things exposed correctly, people don't do that. We call it tunnel vision, and it's not what was actually on that scene. And so just don't do it. But a custom print should be more richer, better, more controlled in tonal ranges and contrast and in saturation and in effects or whatever you want to do, but you shouldn't be able to tell you did anything to it unless you had a bare print side by side to that custom print, and then it better look different. And by doing that and having that background in image competition or all evaluations that we do or all the critiques that I do, I see all those technical errors. I mean, that was my job for a long time, is to make sure I didn't have any of those mistakes on somebody else's work. And so when I see images come into review, they stand out like a sore thumb. Bad burning techniques, bad artwork, bad, you name it. Color balance being out. There's too much saturation, contrast levels. I mean, you see all those things that you probably should have adjusted. And in my mind, if my boss would have had me printed over, it means that it wasn't a saleable image. And if it wasn't a saleable image, it certainly isn't going to do well in print competition, because those things should have been addressed for images at that high of a level.
So great information. One last quick question for anybody that's watching that maybe wants to find out. I know you offer coaching, a little mentoring, and you speak a lot. Where can they go to find out information about how to get in touch with you and also where you may be speaking in the future?
Website is simple enough. It's photoimagesbycarl.net, and Facebook, just Carl Caylor, is fine. And I'd be glad to answer questions, do critiques, do one-on-ones or groups. It's all good.
And I know you're always lecturing at different conferences and conventions all over the country, so they can go there and they'll be able to kind of see your schedule if you're coming near them. So perfect.
Absolutely.
Carl, thank you so much. As always, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. You always have so much great insight and information. Thanks for your time today.
Well, thanks for all the products you have at LexJet. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.